So I'll pass the floor to you, Teodora, once again, our editor-in-chief. And I don't know how to call you anymore. You're doing so much for the project, the do-it-all of the Computational Antitrust project. Glenn, Zoe, see you very soon. And Teodora, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Thibaut. It's a great pleasure to be back online, but I must say that after this extremely intellectually stimulating keynote, we have very big shoes to fill. But I'm sure that in such good company, that will not be a problem at all. So just to give our audience a sense of what to expect, what we are doing here is discussing concrete achievements that are possible with computational antitrust as it stands today. And my goal as a moderator today is to steer the discussion towards highlighting exactly what computational tools can do in terms of bringing us forwards compared to analog research tools that we've seen being used in scholarship for centuries. And what I want to do is to speak as little as possible to give as much room to our fantastic panelists. So without further ado, I want to start the discussion by letting them introduce themselves so that the audience knows who they are. I mean, I'm sure most of you already know them and have read their work, but let's give it a start and then take the discussion from there. To not complicate things, let's do it alphabetically. Maybe Andrew, do you want to start by telling us a bit about who you are and what you research on?
Yeah, sure. My name is Andrew Eckert. I'm in the Department of Economics at the University of Alberta. I've been there for about 20 years. I was an economist at the Canadian Competition Bureau before that, and I've been a visiting scholar at the Alberta Utilities Commission. And my long-standing research has been on pricing, on patterns in pricing, on the potential for patterns to be used in coordination, these sorts of things.
Great. That's all very exciting. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out in today's discussion. I think the next one in the alphabet is Klaus, unless I don't know the alphabet well.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm here in Vienna, so it's in the evening and not in the morning. And I'm economist here at the Vienna University of Economics and Business, and I'm doing since 25 years research on mergers and on regulatory economics. And of course, the recent interest in this topic was quite heavily sparked by this idea that also these small mergers, startup takeovers, can be very problematic from a societal point of view.
Okay, so we have an expert in a very topical issue. That's always very exciting. And now, last but not least, Friso.
Hi, my name is Friso Bostoen. I'm an assistant professor of competition law and digital regulation at Tilburg University in the Netherlands. So most of my research concerns online platforms and how they might or might not abuse their market power and how to analyze all that. But I've also dipped my toes into the computational antitrust pool. Well, a bit more than my toes. I've taken a plunge with a paper on antitrust fines, which I think we'll talk a bit more about today. So thanks a lot for having me, Thibaut, Teodora, and everyone organizing.
Yeah, thanks for the answer, which gives me a great hook to the next question. I will ask you all to give me a 2-3 minute elevator pitch style summary of your article. And since you were the one to mention it first, why don't you give us a start, Friso?
Sure. My paper concerns, well, my co-authored paper together with Bruno van den Bos, who should get a lot of the credit, but who's not on the panel here today, concerns antitrust fines. So the commission sets antitrust fines when a company violates antitrust law. And that process in which it calculates those fines is sometimes considered opaque, even called a black box. Now, that's not entirely fair. The Commission has made strides in making this process more transparent by issuing guidelines. The latest version comes from 2006, and in those, it sort of sets out a step-by-step process on how a fine is calculated. But still, every step has these upper and lower limits. Some steps, can be left out. Maybe there's other factors that enter into the calculation that are not that obvious. So, in short, quite some discretion remains, and the Commission is not always very clear on how it uses that discretion. So we thought, could maybe computational analysis help us elucidate this fine-setting process? Can it show us which factors really are decisive when setting a fine, perhaps even uncover something like a fining formula that the Commission relies on. So what we did is take all antitrust fines, or rather all cartel fines specifically, since the latest guidelines in 2006. So that's about 500 fines. We coded some of its data manually, other we had coded automatically via these regular expressions, regexes. And then we used machine learning method to build decision trees for the fine setting process, divided by every commissioner since 2006. So that would be Commissioner Koos, Almunia, and Vestager, the current commissioner. And in very short, to say what we found, well, the Commission says fines in a very, maybe almost suspiciously consistent manner, at least when it comes to the basic amount of the fine, so the largest chunk of a fine. It then adjusts that basic amount, and there it gets a bit more tricky. It doesn't always, make these adjustments, for example, for aggravating circumstances. So there, sometimes we had to go away from the computational tools and just dive into the decisions to see what they're doing. But all in all, the formula that we uncovered follows these guidelines fairly closely. So they do go quite a way in making this this process more transparent. So I'll leave it there and hope we can come back to some of that.
Yeah, for sure we will. Thanks a lot. This was great. And it's fantastic to see that one of the main themes of the conference seems to be opening up black boxes, shedding light on the unknown. So I really love that. Who wants to go next? Klaus, Andrew?
Okay.
Klaus is you're keen, so go ahead.
Okay, then I go ahead. So our paper is also co-authored. It's Florian Sütsch and Ulrich Wohak, who is also on the list of spectators. So what we are doing is we look at market definition and how we can use machine learning techniques to do that. So we take all the mergers that were undertaken by GAFAM firms, by the 5 big tech companies, like 1,000 mergers or acquisitions. We match the data, the mergers to Crunchbase, which has 1 million firms plus. And then we estimate cosine similarity scores, so how similar the targets are to their competitors, which is to be determined. And we estimate different cutoffs of those cosine similarity measures, 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, and the larger the measure, the larger is the overlap, is the similarity of the target and potential competitors. And so we estimate then treatment effects, these consecutively larger markets, meaning smaller similarity. And what comes out of this, so this would not be possible without those techniques, of course, because it's simply not computationally, simply not possible to do it. And so we apply that, and what comes out is that a similarity of 0.3 to 0.4 gives you the largest treatment effects of those mergers. Treatment on venture capital, negative, which is negative on average. And it's sort of what it should do is, of course, give some additional tool to look at those mergers and acquisitions where you don't have any data on prices or quantities. Like you cannot do traditional market definition. So that's the idea.
That's great. I hope your co-author from the audience is happy with your answer. I definitely am. And on that note, let's see what Andrew has to. Well, I hope you've freed him then. Andrew, do you want to add your input?
Sure. So our paper started from, there's a long-standing debate on the role of information and transparency in a market. For example, transparency on prices of firms, other firm choices. On the one hand, a high degree of information availability and transparency can allow for a more effective consumer search, can allow firms to respond better to changing conditions. But there's also the potential that's been raised that increased transparency in a market can facilitate coordination by allowing firms to better monitor rivals or allow them perhaps to communicate through public information. Now, detecting communication through public information can be really challenging for regulators, for antitrust agencies in settings where firms interact frequently at high frequency. There's a lot of public information that could be manipulated, and there's a wide range of different ways you might manipulate it to send a signal or communicate something. And so we were interested in the potential for machine learning techniques in this context, and we were interested in a specific context, and that's the Alberta wholesale electricity market. Now, that market operates hourly. For each hour, firms that generate energy will submit bids saying how much they're willing to supply at certain prices. The market will then clear for the hour, and these bids will determine who generates what and what the market price is. At the end of the hour, the information on bids was revealed, but with no identifying information. So the information on who submitted a particular bid was removed. Now, in August 2013, we're going back a little bit, the market monitor, the MSA, released a report alleging that certain firms were using patterns in their bids to reveal their identity, to say this is who submitted this bid, and to send signals about how they plan to behave in the future and to encourage coordination. Now, at the time in that report, the patterns that were identified, and they didn't say what they were, they just said they'd found examples of firms tagging their bids. These patterns were identified through visual inspection of the data and simple summary statistics, looking at modes and other percentiles. And so we thought, well, there's a lot of, in a setting like that, there's a lot of public information. There's a lot of ways you might communicate through pricing, and just visual inspection and simple graphs and simple statistics might not do a very good job. So we wanted to look at the ability of machine learning to detect these sorts of patterns, right? And our particular question was, can we use machine learning to, if you like, test the allegation that firms were bidding in a way that would reveal their identities to rivals in this public information? All right, so we asked whether machine learning algorithms can predict the identities of the firms behind these bids. And what we found was, yes, indeed, we could predict the identities of a firm's rivals, the bids associated with a firm's rivals, with a high degree of accuracy up to when the Market Monitor released this report in August. And at that time, the ability to predict rivals crashed, right? Because firms changed their behavior once this report came out. What was also interesting was that after the report came out, after a while, the ability to detect rivals increased again, suggesting they can find other ways to communicate besides the patterns that were already identified. It also allowed us to ask, well, the ways that we can identify firms in their bids, are these benign, right? I have a plant that's 50 megawatts, and so I bid 50 megawatts, and everyone figures that out. Or are they patterns that are more suggestive of a deliberate attempt to communicate? And in this setting, for example, it turns out patterns involve things like patterns in the decimal portion of a price, right? 0.6, 0.15, 0.24, a firm submitting that sort of pattern was a specific firm, for example. So I think our paper confirms that machine learning and other computational techniques can be useful in identifying whether public information might be employed for communication to enhance coordination. And it can also be useful in assessing the degree of information being disclosed in the market. I'll stop there for now.
I love that. I love the ending remark, because that was going to be my next question, but it's great because I can just push the ball back to Klaus and Friso. So the next question was going to be, what did you think that could not be tackled with analog tools, but computational tools could enlighten? And what has made you decide to carry out this research, particularly through using computational techniques? And since Andrew already answered, I think it's for the two of you now to chime in on that. Maybe Klaus, do you want to start?
Okay. Well, as said, those startups, those targets in the mergers, they are very small. They are nascent. They exist since 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So you don't have data on them, with the exception possibly of number of employees or funding rounds. But what you do have is business descriptions. You know in which area they are operating and where they're located. So this is, of course, for market definition, that's a very big problem because as you might know, the standard market definition tool is the SNP test. So you estimate demand elasticity with prices and quantity data at best. You cannot do that here. Huh? There is no quantity, there's no data, there's no price data. Maybe there's not even a product out there. So it's just an idea possibly, or maybe there's some software. So you cannot do traditional market definition. So you cannot essentially analyze the merger with traditional techniques. So and so we propose, it's not perfect, of course, but it's one way to look at it, to get at this way of competition between targets, the rivals, possibly the acquirer, etc. So this is the idea.
Great, that was very clear. Thanks a lot. Friso, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, so I was triggered to use computational tools, not because I woke up one day and thought, today is a good day for computational antitrust research, but rather because I was having this question on protectionism in EU antitrust law. There's this hypothesis that the European Commission, in enforcing antitrust law, is biased against non-EU firms, specifically US firms. And you'll find this in the statements of US presidents who, when a big merger between two US firms gets blocked, or when a high fine is imposed on a US tech company, they will make some statements about the Commission, being anti-US. And there's been some good research on this in the area of merger control, where you sort of have pretty clear-cut decisions. The merger is allowed or it is blocked. Some in between, you do have mergers with remedies, but still, it allows for some fairly clear-cut testing. With the fines imposed, we didn't really have that type of research because it's a more continuous figure. It's difficult to see what the impact of a specific factor is, such as the nationality of a firm. So we're kind of stuck with some anecdotes there, good anecdotes, but not great research. So what we realized is if we want to know whether the nationality of a firm plays a role, we'd have to basically look at a large body of decisions and figure out, well, what role nationality played in a more or less, solid way. And we quickly realized that going through all cartel decisions, that was just not feasible, or at least we were really not feeling like that. That would cost a lot of time, be very tedious. So instead, we relied on computational tools for, two main reasons, basically. They allow you to go through these large data sets, giving you some measure of certainty. Also introducing some new uncertainty, but it does bring something new to the table. Talking about fines specifically, practitioners have a pretty good sense of those. And even as a researcher, you could read 10 decisions, 20 decisions, 30, but you'd never get the full picture. And by going through truly every decision and every cartel fine, we could get a sort of more systematic view. Plus, they allowed us also to see some things which otherwise we just couldn't see due to our human limitations. We were interested, as I talked about the impact of nationality on the fine, but there were also 30 other variables that we checked for in fines that we coded. And if I had to read those decisions, keeping those all those variables in mind and spotting the kind of sentences that might hint at the use of that variable, we just my human brain is definitely not capable of that. But computational tools do a much better job. So that's why we've turned to those kind of methods.
Okay, so that's great. You're already showing us a bit how computational tools take us forward. But something you said has triggered me. You said you didn't wake up one day and think it's a good day to do computational antitrust. I think that's because every day is a fantastic day to do computational antitrust. So that's how I see it, at least. Andrew, do you want to add anything to this question? I know you've sort of answered it before, but if you want to add anything, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so just, I mean, I made the comment that in a setting where there's a large amount of information that can be manipulated, but even when there's not, right? So even if we were just to focus in this wholesale electricity market on the bids, and that's all, right? So a firm would submit a bid for submit up to 7 bids for each generating unit they have, and a bid would be, here's a quantity I'm willing to supply at a particular price. Even if we just focus on that, the array of possibilities that firms could submit could convey signals, convey information is enormous. It could be in the size of the quantity. It could be in the magnitude of the price. It could be in the second digit of the quantity. It could be in the decimal of the price. It could be in the way that this price relates to the next one. It could be the way that this price relates to what I bid in a previous hour or on a previous day. And so even if we just focus only on the bids, the ability of visual inspection, while visual inspection did find patterns, I also think that it could be worked around. And it could be, people could say, okay, well, we can't use this obvious a pattern anymore, we'll use something else. And that's sort of what we saw when we saw the ability to recognize rivals increase again after a few months after the report came out.
I think your answer is great because it really points out to how a very controversial topic in antitrust, as in information transparency, cannot be investigated with analog tools, but if we rely on computational methods, that can really bring us forward to understanding what exactly plays a role in price coordination. Now, let me ask you a different question. Do you think the results of your paper are actionable? And if so, who would be the main stakeholders who can benefit from them? Is it competition agencies? Is it law firms? Is it the industry? Is it perhaps even consumers, fellow academics? What do you think? Who wants to get us started on this one?
Well, if no one else
Klaus,
is piping
you're
up,
smiling.
I'll pipe up.
Okay, Andrew, go
no
ahead.
one else has jumped up. Yeah, I think what we've been doing would be sort of immediately useful as screening tools for coordination, the detection of patterns in pricing and in bids. We can imagine as well within the industry, electricity markets have monitoring agencies. These monitoring agencies have a mandate to monitor market power and possible anti-competitive behavior. These tools can be useful in screening for things that require further investigation, for sure.
Okay, that's great. Klaus?
I would agree to the screening thing because that's maybe also the case in our case. I mean, defining markets is of course the business of the authorities, of the competition agencies, and if they don't have the data that they need, but they need to take decisions, it would help them possibly, but maybe not only. Maybe also some law firms might be interested in the analysis of those markets, and also maybe venture capitalists could say that I would or would not invest possibly in those similar companies, but mostly it's possibly the competition agencies that might benefit.
And Friso, what about your paper?
Yeah, I think there's some different groups that could benefit. I mean, law firms and industry might be happy to get a better insight into how fines are calculated that might be imposed on them on their clients. But I think perhaps the main intended parties for research are, well, first of all, the European Commission, who sets the actual fines. Of course, I don't think we're really surprising them with our research. Surely they were completely up to date on their own finding methods. But it could spur some reflection, also maybe academic reflection, because one finding that we had is that the commission sets fines in this very small range. I mean, cartels are sort of the most egregious antitrust offense, and the commission sets, well, the base amount of a fine, we tend to set that between 0 and 30% of the sales of the cartelized product. So you would say for a cartel, this antitrust offense, that should be on the higher end of the range. It's not exactly what we found. Rather, fines for cartels tend to be around the middle of that range, this 15%, 16%, maybe 17%. So I think the commission does this strategically because we saw in appeals against fining decisions that, you know, when the commission sticks to that middle of the range for something as offensive to antitrust as a cartel, the general courts, you know, does not really scrutinize it in much depth. It just passes it along. So it's a safe policy, but we would wonder whether it's also good policy. Shouldn't fines optimize for a goal such as deterrence, and thus, you know, sticking to an exact figure for every type of cartel fine, can it really optimize for the, you know, given the variety of cartels and other restrictive arrangements? So that's maybe something more for academics than the commission itself to reflect upon. But that's something we definitely hope will be inserted into the debate.
Well, it would be indeed quite surprising if the commission itself found stuff about their own methodology through your paper. Let's hope that's not the case. That would say a lot about their methodologies. Indeed, you never know. As a follow-up on this, do you think your research could be turned into a template or a tool that could be used by the stakeholders you identified? As in, Klaus, for instance, do you think that your methodology could be easily transferred to law firms or competition agencies? Would you be willing to engage in that? Because as we said yesterday in the intro, what we want to do here is also to create this learning community where we exchange tools and we teach each other how to get further with computational antitrust.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are publicly available databases. There was one question. Crunchbase, was even free of charge for us, maybe because we are a university. There's a lot of textual information about companies. There's much less information in terms of concrete products or pricing, quantity. So I would say yes, because in the digital economy and in where we are moving, textual information is what you have, and sometimes you don't have other data simply. So you've got to use what it's there, because you have to decide. Huh? And I think the quality of decision can only be better if you have a good idea of the competitive landscape. And what you can also possibly better do with the textual information is to look at how competition evolves over time, because you cannot estimate every year price elasticity of demand. But this evolution of dynamic competition might be also a good part and a good insight for competition agencies. And it's not. I said my co-author did a lot of work in that respect, but I mean it's not rocket science. Huh? It's standard statistical packages to have implemented it. So it's not that you need super computer experts, a new department of computer experts in every competition authority. So I think yes, it can be, but of course there are some limits to it. It need to be complementary to your other analysis. It's not a standalone analysis. Huh? It's not implication that then the decision is there, huh? When you apply those techniques. But it may help you get better decisions.
So there's two things from your answer which really stood out to me. First, you use the word dynamic in relation to competition, which is one of our favorite word combinations here at our project.
Right.
And then you also said that it's not rocket science to do computational antitrust, which is of course great news for everyone in the audience to maybe get brave and experiment with computational tools. Andrew, what about you? Do you think you could maybe give a hand to the industry, competition agencies, firms to learn from your paper?
Sure. I mean, again, I would repeat that our techniques were in some sense quite off the shelf, right? I mean, we were using well-established algorithms, random forest decision trees, and discovering how well these algorithms, these off-the-shelf algorithms, could detect patterns. And that was maybe my favorite part of the project, was digging into what these decision trees were actually doing and saying, what, they actually are doing the job. And in terms of data, in the industry that we're working at, electricity, there's an enormous amount of data available to the regulators and monitoring agencies. But again, the patterns we were looking for were in data of quantities and prices, and where this is available, these sorts of algorithms could be applied. So I don't think. I think that what we've been doing so far is using conventional tools many people will be familiar with, and using data that many people will have access to in certain settings.
That's also great to figure out that you don't need to reinvent the wheel to come up with such important insights for competition enforcement. And that's also refreshing. Now going back to Friso, I want to tweak the question a bit. Do you think that the methodology you used can be applied to other types of competition decisions? Do you envisage such research being done in the future by the academics that you identified as the key stakeholders of your paper? Or maybe by yourself, you never know.
Yeah, of course, the right of first refusal to follow up research. Yes and no. I mean, we definitely want to create the opportunity for that. So what we did is make all our data openly accessible on the GitHub page of my co-author, even the scripts we use. So for example, what you could easily do is extend this to the future, see how the finding methodology of the European Commission changes when new decisions come out, whether our formula that we found still has that same predictive value. So that's kind of an easy extension. You could also apply it to finds in other areas. But there you run up to the problem of data, because of course the data, like for cartel finds, is openly available, kind of in a difficult format. You have to go through the PDFs. That's why we put them all in an Excel table that's up online. But once you have the data, there needs to be, to do the kind of analysis that we did, you need a good amount of it. And abusive dominance decisions, for example, are there's only a couple of them, even if you go back through the last 20 years, not really enough to do the same kind of quantitative analysis. So you run up to some limits in extending the methodology there, but you could definitely look at maybe cartel fines by national competition authorities. Do they work with similar methodologies, differences? What does that mean? And I think maybe what I'd love to see someone do, but I don't think it'll be me because I just haven't figured out a good way to do it, is to build on this, to look at the effectiveness of antitrust fines. But there I feel, again, you run up to some data issues. What are the cartels prevented, deterred by a fine? This becomes very difficult. But if somebody has ideas, I'd love to listen to them.
This is something we really want to encourage at our project, research on the effects of enforcement, because we don't see that happening a lot. And also when we publish our annual report, there's not enough work being done in terms of what effects enforcement has had upon market structures, market practices, and so on. But maybe Klaus or Andrew, do you think you would be interested in looking at that in the future? Klaus, I see you coming closer, so I guess that's a sign of an intention to speak.
I jump into it. Definitely, yes. As I said, it's a complementary, for me at least, it's complementary technology to theory. It will not be abolished. Theorizing and theories of harm will not be gone. Of course, we need them. But it's a supplementary, complementary technology. It's very useful. And in this other paper, we looked at how competition changed among the GAFAM firms in the last 20 years. And of course, we could not do that without those similarity measures. So they became more similar to each other. Of course, it's not a proof that they fiercely compete with each other, but it's an indication. And then maybe you could then look at it in more detail and look at it whether it's plausible over time, and you get maybe at something then. Yeah? So definitely, it's not one shot. And Ulrich is in another project, one of the co-authors, in a large-scale project. You could look at patent data and the abstracts of patents, for example. There are 100 million patents out there. Every patent has an abstract, and so it's too precious to leave it in the ground, and we need to lift it.
Andrew, do you agree that it's too precious to be left where it is and we need to do more with it? Or you want to disagree?
Oh, no.
This would be a bad audience to disagree with, but
yeah, I'm not going to
ahead.
disagree with that, right? I see, first of all, further directions we could go even with our own context and that we're trying to do, right? As I said, we were using off-the-shelf algorithms, but there's also a large literature on pattern recognition, and there's scope for applying that here. And that's something that, I mean, this has been applied to text analysis, crime data analysis, consumer purchases. There's scope to be using these sorts of things here, right? Going back to the question of the influence of the regulatory interaction on behavior, I think we have a sort of nice example in this paper that once they released a report saying we think firms are pricing in a certain way, suddenly everybody stopped. But it didn't mean that the ability of information to be conveyed went away. It just meant they had to be a little smarter about it. But no, I think we're in the process of taking algorithms from other contexts to bring them more to bear in here to see if they can do a better job. But I think on the same, the other side of the coin is that what we're doing here could be brought to bear at other settings as well. Yeah,
that definitely answered my question. Also happy that there's no disagreement. That would complicate my position as a moderator. So thanks a lot for that. Now I just want to take a step back and remind the audience that you each look at controversial but very important aspects of competition law. So we have market definition, we have cartel fines, and we have price transparency. You all did research which is novel in terms not just of the tools you applied, but also the findings you've come up with. Building on these findings, do you think that what you've realized through your research could inform better antitrust policies? Or have you perhaps identified some blind spots of the current rules? What do you think? Friso, you look very keen.
Yeah, I could maybe start off. I think the clearest sort of policy area was obviously the setting of antitrust fines, and then the main finding that should animate any policy changes, if any, would be just the fact that, well, we see the Commission setting fines very safely in that middle of the range, say, 16% of cartelized sales. Of course, translating that to policy, that's where another sort of arduous journey begins, because, well, the Commission might have some good reasons to impose those sort of fines. It's procedurally efficient. You're not going to get annulled on appeal, which is nice if you worked on a decision for years. So it might be a smart policy. So you have to take account not only of the fact that we're not optimizing for deterrence, maybe, but at least deterrence is also not optimal if cartel fines are annulled all the time and cartels get away without a fine because the decision didn't hold up. So there's definitely, I think, room for debate there, and I think if this range that the Commission came up with in the first place is solid, then they should probably stick to that, and which means slightly higher cartel fines, maybe lower for other types of arrangements. But yeah, in the translation to policy, there's a lot of other considerations, so it becomes a bit more fuzzy. There's not a one-on-one connection either.
I see. Well, if they just discovered their methodology through your paper, then perhaps we'll see changes in the future. If that's not the case, then I guess they'll stick to what they're doing now. Klaus, do you think we can define markets better in the future, building on your research? Or not necessarily better, to put it in a less normative way, differently?
Maybe some markets, for those that are those nascent markets where you don't have other information, where the products are still in their infancy, it might be good to have at least some methodology to apply. Maybe in other more traditional markets where everything is clear, or where you have all the necessary traditional data, it's not so important possibly to look at machine learning techniques. But in this, we looked at, I think, as I said, it's complementary, and one should use it. If you have it, you should use it.
I think that's a great approach, to see computational tools as a complement and not necessarily a full-fledged replacement to whatever we are doing now. And that's pretty much the approach we're taking here. We're trying to incrementally improve things, not to reinvent the wheel from scratch. And Andrew, what do you think? Have you identified any blind spots of antitrust?
Well,
any improvement points?
I think that what this algorithm, what this type of analysis can do is help regulators and antitrust agencies understand the implications of transparency in particular settings. So in electricity, for example, a lot of information in near real time or real time can be made available. As a concrete example, of course, in the Alberta setting, they did have this rule that at the end of the hour, they would release all the bids that were submitted, but they would de-identify them. And so at minimum, this suggests that this effort at de-identifying was not successful, because you could figure out who was submitting bids. It might have even created disadvantages and advantages if more sophisticated players are better able to work out, to learn information from as to who's submitting the bids and what signals are being sent. In other settings, in a lot of markets worldwide, in gasoline, agencies have started, or governments have started posting on websites. Here's all the prices of all the stations in an area. The idea being, let's increase transparency so that consumers can better do search and find the lowest price. But of course, if you're increasing transparency for consumers, you're also increasing transparency for firms. And so therefore, this potential for, are you creating increased potential for coordination? Well, that's something that these sorts of algorithms might be used to assess.
Indeed, and that's fundamental for competition agencies to understand, and you did an amazing job at illuminating to them what the effects of price transparency are. Do you think that in the future you will be more brave in terms of the topics you choose? Or in what other respects do you think computational tools can impact what research we do and what we can dare to research in antitrust in general?
So for me, this was really my first foray into applying machine learning techniques. And so I was leaning heavily on co-authors, Douglas and Daniel, who have a lot of expertise in this area. Now, this project has definitely, brought me into seeing the advantages of these techniques, particularly for predictive exercises, particularly for exercises involving large quantities of data. Absolutely. I am currently now pursuing with these co-authors other projects, other competition-related projects, using similar techniques. And I think in a world of such large and complicated and high-frequency data, it's sort of inevitable that you need to rely on these sort of techniques.
Klaus, would you agree?
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, it depends on the research question, and if you have good data, otherwise maybe you bought some data on price and quantity, possibly you don't need that. But if you have more this text-based, for example, the European Commission, you can download every case, every merger case, every decision of the last 25 years. Some 10,000 decisions, and the average length is, I don't know, 50 pages, 100 pages. So you can imagine you cannot do it by case. It would be a PhD's life would be too short to do that. But with those techniques, you can maybe estimate, I don't know, something on the version ratios or something on differentiate products between target and rival and or acquirer and target, which you might not or cannot do simply by reading those cases. And so, yes, it will shape, I think, research, but it depends on the question and the data you have at hand. So be opportunistic.
I think it's great how you pointed out that it's indeed very tedious to download decisions one by one, but then again, we know that academics have this passion of collecting PDFs and never reading them, but keeping them there just in case one day they will be relevant, right, or they will seem they will seem very pressing to read.
Measures like number of pages or number of words, which you can easily count, but of course this doesn't give you what you want to have. No? So you need to go into the meaning of the text. For example, differentiated products is a hot topic. Innovation, efficiencies.
Definitely. And Friso, how have computational tools brought you forward from downloading PDFs?
Yeah, still my main job, but no, I think it's a good point. That depends on the question. I was thrown into this by just the nature of the question requiring it, at least the way I saw it. And you know, as an antitrust lawyer by training, that was still quite of a challenge. You know, antitrust lawyers are always comfortable cosplaying as economists, so I thought, okay, we can also cosplay as a computer scientist. Turned out to be more difficult than I expected. Luckily, I had a co-author who was more proficient in that, but still, you have to be there, you know, every step of the way, make sure everything makes sense, solve 101 problems. So I think, you know, this project had the longest runtime of any other publication, except perhaps my PhD thesis itself that I went through. So if I come up with another question that requires it, I might go back to computational methods, but also remember that it's a lot of work, a lot of downloading of PDFs. So I'm warning myself there.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see in your career as an antitrust scholar what other hats you'll put on apart from an economist and a software engineer. I think there was a question in the Q&A about data sources. I cannot see it anymore after it was thrown out. Can maybe one of you read it out loud and also give an attempt at answering it? Or has it disappeared for you as well?
No, it's what are key sources of data for computational techniques, data available from marketplaces, scraping public data from the marketplaces, use some regulatory authority to demand certain data.
Yes, that's it. And I love it when my panelists also ask themselves the questions. It makes my job way, way easier. So given that Klaus has put the effort of reading the question, maybe one of the others want to get us started?
I mean, there are, of course, the internet provides a lot of data sources, but also the regulatory authorities, like 10K reports from the SEC. But I think any source might be good, but of course, it needs to be somehow structured. There's a recent development to use registry data from the statistical offices, which is very interesting development because, of course, they are much cleaner, which gives you answers you cannot give with data from the internet. So I think it's a hodgepodge of data sources. I would not exclude one. I mean, it depends how much money you have. You cannot buy very good data from Standard & Poor's or something. But we for example, in our paper, the Crunchbase was there, but you could also take other databases, and it's reasonable to utilize whatever you have. Huh?
Yeah, I think that's a good policy to have in life as a baseline. Use whatever you have and then see what that brings you.
Because this is what those techniques maybe has an advantage. You're not overwhelmed by the sheer size of the data, but you can apply those techniques. Huh? So they need not be so structured as we usually like them or need them.
Yeah, so for our question, which really sort of an initial screening for coordination, I don't think you'd be at that point. You'd be demanding data. Certainly, the work that we did used data that in the industry market monitoring agencies would routinely have. Right, this was nothing that they would have to go out and get. If you were screening for coordination in another setting, it might be that you would need to obtain say price data, scrape them from websites or something like that. Certainly in the industry you're working with, these agencies would have these data routinely in real time. And so there was nothing they would have to go out and obtain. But in other settings, I mean, certainly, in the past, I've had to scrape data off airline websites, and I've had to visit bars to get prices. And so there's different ways to get information. But in this project, it was all stuff that would be readily on hand.
So you said two things which I found quite interesting. First, that you sometimes have to play detective to do computational research, as in go to bars. I think that's indeed very entertaining. But then you also said that the data we have brings us a long way, and I think that's very true. And now just to give Friso the last word, what data did you use? Was it just PDFs?
Yeah, well, I'll definitely steal the method of going to bars to get data. Not sure if they'll be relevant, but it seems like a good fun thing to do. No, we relied on enforcement data, and the nice thing, at least with an agency like the Commission, is at least you have the full-fledged decisions all in a database. It's not the most user-friendly database, and in fact they're now changing that. But at least you do find that place to download all the PDFs, and then you can take it from there. So that was our method.
Great, not as fun as going to bars indeed, but you do what you can. And now we have the last question, which is very seasonal and topical. Given that Christmas is coming, somebody asks, do you have a wish list of data manipulation tools or data sources you'd love to get from Santa Claus or whomever will give you gifts this season? I see you're silent, so maybe you've been all naughty this year and no gifts for you, or I don't know.
We don't believe in it anymore. So, wish list. Well, what is surprising is that talking about those GAFAM companies, that so little is known about them. I mean, they worth, I don't know, $5 trillion. Nobody knows their advertising structure, their consumer structure, other very important data. So looking inside those tech giants would be possibly one of my unfulfillable wishes for Christmas.
I'll make sure to let Santa know. What about the others? Andrew, do you have your letter to Santa ready?
Well, so in the context of electricity, for example, there even within what marketing monitors have and what's publicly available, there's lots of information on real-time pricing, but what tends to be lacking is contractual information, right? Have they contracted forward for certain quantities at certain prices? They can certainly do that, and that data tend not to be available, but as we know that it can have large implications for their incentives to exercise market power. And so if Santa's listening, some data on forward contracts would be welcome.
And Friso, what do you want for Christmas?
Yeah, I would love some data that I'm not sure is even out there. So, but I'm sure Santa can find a way to get it, which is the rate of cartels being found out. There are estimates of this, of course, but to really know, is it 1 out of 2 cartels, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10 that is actually fined by a regulatory authority? I think once we know that, you could start saying something much more sensible about the effectiveness of the fines we've been looking at. So that'd be great data if Santa has it lying around.
Great. So if Santa is in the audience and if you were good this year and you behaved, then you'll all get amazing data sources and data manipulation tools this Christmas. If not, then we'll have our answers. And on that note, I'll pass it over to Thibaut to ensure the transition to the next equally exciting panel, I would say. And thanks a lot for all of you for joining. It was great fun to talk to you, and Merry Christmas, and hope you get your wishes come true.
Yeah,
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thank you, Teodora.
Bye.